Welcome to the Operator Lab podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Seib, and on this show, we sit down with founders, operators, and key decision makers to break down how real businesses actually run, grow, and optimize behind the scenes. Today, I'm joined by James Agris, founder of Second Street Strategy. James, welcome.
Great to be here.
Glad to have you. You've built something pretty unique, a boutique practice doing commercial due diligence and AI enablement for private equity. And you've kept it intentionally small for 6 years. So I want to get into all of that today. For anyone who doesn't know you yet, what is Second Street Strategy and what do you actually do for your clients?
Yeah, happy to answer that. Second Street Strategy is a boutique consultancy focused on two topics: commercial due diligence and growth strategy, working with middle market private equity firms and their portfolio companies. Most often I work on deals. I help private equity firms who are looking to invest in a particular target understand the target's strategy and how it resonates or doesn't resonate in the context of the market in which it operates. So answer questions like, how big is the market in which this target operates? How do the customers who purchase these goods or services make their purchasing decisions? Who are the key competitors and how does the target differentiate from them, both positively and negatively? And what does it mean for the future growth potential for the company? So that's, the company's about 6 years old. We have a staff of 3 people, including myself, and work with, lower middle market private equity firms on these topics for the past 6 years.
Okay. That's a side, everything you talked about is a side of private equity most people don't usually see. I want to talk about how you ended up doing this. You came up with McKinsey, EY Parthenon. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And investment banking before going independent.
Yeah.
What made you want to break off and build something on your own?
Well, so, to kind of answer your first question of, is this a side of private equity that most people don't see? I mean, I think private equity is a giant industry, right? I mean, you have companies like Blackstone and TPG, which are publicly traded, and they're doing these giant leverage buyouts of enterprise level organizations, right? But it goes down all the way to, a company that's buying up HR contractors in Illinois and trying to build essentially kind of an operating platform of these types of businesses, or they're making small kind of software acquisitions, softwares that are $1 to $2 million of revenue. The founder is going to retire, has nobody else to acquire the business. They want to preserve the business for their employees, and the company acquires it with the idea that they'll kind of be able to employ some of the best practices in software development, software marketing in order to maybe grow the revenue slightly, right? And kind of preserve the company for the founder while providing them with some liquidity, exit liquidity for their retirement. So I think, private equity gets a lot of negative attention in the news, but it comes in all shapes and sizes, right? A lot of it is just a way to, facilitate investment money into a small business landscape that business would fold up otherwise. As far as how I got into it, right? I started my consulting career at McKinsey. I was doing I was working with enterprise level clients that are all over the world. I lived in Dubai, I lived in Switzerland. It's a tough lifestyle. I mean, that's the primary reason why I left. I had a kid, and going to Dubai and Switzerland wasn't really in the cards for me. I got into this M&A and strategy kind of world at Houlihan Lokey, and this is kind of where I learned how to essentially do this type of work. I spent some time at EY Parthenon as well, but I always felt like the work I want to do, I'll be better off, on my own. I wanted to be my own boss. I kind of thought that the way I approach these projects makes the most sense to me, right? I really produce better answers to clients. During COVID, this was when I founded Second Street Strategy. It just seemed like a natural point for me to kind of go off on my own, try my hand at entrepreneurship. And like I said in the beginning, I kept it deliberately small. My kids are relatively young now. It allows me to spend a lot of time with them, right? I don't have to travel as much, and I can kind of work on my own terms. And that's probably the best part of being an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's a main reason why anyone becomes an entrepreneur is, for the schedule and just be able to do things the way they want to. I think a lot of people in your position eventually try to scale that into something bigger. You went the other way. You've kept this small boutique operation, and I believe you said it was just the 3 of you.
Mhm.
Was that always the plan, or did you arrive there?
Yeah, I think I didn't, I don't know what the future holds, right? And I think maybe trying to scale it is something that I'll do in the future, but I think it comes with its own challenges, right? Obviously, the cost at which you operate needs to scale up if you have more staff, and then you're starting to compete with more, so established firms. And at the price point my lean scale allows me to compete at, I can kind of work with low and middle market firms. They may not necessarily have $250,000 to spend on this type of project, but they still need the answers that I'm able to provide at a high quality that, you cannot gate by just, you cannot gain by just using AI, right? Or doing this type of work yourself. So this is a niche that I think exists. And there's a few folks around the country that I've met that do this type of work. There's also a lot of, let's say, sector specific independent consultants that if that have worked in a particular sector that help with commercial due diligence. So let's say, if you sold a garage door repair business, to a private equity firm and you're now retired, you may be working with other PE firms who helping them acquire kind of garage door repair businesses or other services businesses. But that's a little bit different that I do, right? I kind of provide an independent perspective, very similar to what you would see from larger firms who do commercial due diligence work, like I said, at a scale that's appropriate for low and middle market.
Okay. James, I want to get into something you brought up before we started recording, because I think it's the most useful part of this for anyone listening who's thinking about going independent themselves. You've said most people who try to go independent end up either growing it into something bigger or quietly going back to a job. You've done neither for 6 years. What's actually kept this working?
I think a few things. I thought, my wife, she's also kind of a freelancer. She's a freelance journalist. So this allows us to, really kind of organize the schedule of our lives, how we see fit. I think that was a kind of big component to it, right? If she worked a corporate job but only had 2 weeks vacation a year, maybe I'd be more apt at getting a job myself. But, this, like I said, this enables us to really kind of organize our life around our independent work. I think a lot of people who do independent consulting do it because they left a job, they got, there was a riff. And that's how I started, right? Essentially, I left EY Parthenon and I was thinking, I'll try this for a couple months. If it works, great, I'll continue. If not, I'll get another job, and here I am, almost 6 years later. But a lot of people who enter this, they just use their network, they find an independent gig while they interview for another job, right? So they're not really approaching it as a business. Like, they may not even create a website. They might not even have an email address for their business, right? And this is that's something that and often they get a gig and then they kind of use that gig to leverage into a full-time position with their client, right? I've never kind of thought of doing that. Particularly the work that I do doesn't necessarily lend itself to this type of arrangement, right? It's because the projects, these commercial due diligence projects, they tend to be 3 to 4 weeks long, right? So I constantly have to churn and find new clients. So it doesn't necessarily lend itself to this kind of long-term transition. But yeah, I mean, this is essentially what enabled me to do it. Like I don't have anything else I'd rather do, and I'm going to continue doing this as long as I can.
That sounds like a good plan. What's the part of running it solo or with 2 other people that people underestimate before they try it?
In what way, Ethan?
Running the company by yourself or keeping it small with the other 2 people that you have. What is one thing that people would underestimate before trying to either run their own company solo or with a small team?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably it has to be like the stress that lack of business development can create for you, right? It's the deal market is and consulting market overall is a cyclical market. There's slow periods, there's fast periods. Sometimes, I have more work that I know to deal with. I have to subcontract. I have to, work with other partners, other independent consultants to fulfill all the work that I'm able to generate. And that's great. And it creates its own stress that like I won't be able to do all this work and, leave money on the table. And then in other periods, it gets really slow. The deal market isn't happening. The interest rates, been raised and nobody wants to do a deal. The geopolitical situation creates uncertainty and people get skittish about the impact of different events on the business, and they don't want to make any deals. And then you're slow and you have nothing to do except, email people and hope they want to catch up with you and try to build relationships. So I think just not letting that kind of stress you out, that ebb and flow, and just having a plan and kind of going along with it. I think that's kind of the most important thing in trying to be successful here. When I was a consultant at places like McKinsey, right? Slow periods when you have work is called being on the beach, right? So, you typically work very long hours in consulting, but those are the periods you would come in, you work 9 to 5, you go home like a regular person, but you still get the same paycheck. You can't do it for a while because they'll definitely get on you. But here, like, this is not necessarily even an option, and being on the beach is no longer a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with so much things that you said there. I think, being a small team, there's so much you have to take on. So, prioritizing what is, or knowing what to prioritize, what's going to be most urgent to get you to your goal is, you have to definitely know what you're doing to step into that space. James, most of your business comes from past clients and relationships, with the rest from referral partners. I'm curious, has it ever been a concern to not have a more systemic way of bringing in new business, or is the way that you're doing things, is it working well for you?
I mean, I think as I think of consulting in general, right, it's a relationship-driven business, and referrals and relationships are really the only way to bring business, right? This is not something you can digital market yourself into, right? This has been a traditional route of business development as long as the consulting industry existed. So I think what I'm doing makes a lot of sense, right? When I was starting out, more of my business came from referral partners, and probably 80% in the first year, but slowly but surely I was able to build myself, a network of clients that can rely on me for the diligence work. And this is where my work is coming from. And it's the same way that any of the larger consulting firms been built,
Yeah, no worries. Bit of a tough question, but it sounds like you obviously have a system that works for you. Word of mouth is a great way to get.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a system, right? I mean, this is like I said, it's a relationship-driven business, right? So,
yeah.
I think where the system component comes in, and I do actually, and AI has been a kind of a help here, right? Is when you get busy, when you have busy delivering work, well, naturally, what falls off the plate first is business development. Like when I was starting out, I made myself a kind of a rule that you're going to speak with 5 people a day. Like a day is not going to go by when you don't speak with 5 people. And I kept at it, via email, via chat, via text, on the phone, on Zoom, whatever it takes, right? I have to have a connection. But when you get busy, those things, delivering work, those things naturally kind of start to fall off, right? So you have to have discipline in order to maintain the business development, the relationship building component of it, even if delivering current client work is something that you kind of need to. So that's kind of the systematic component that it can never fall off. And where AI has been actually helpful in that is like setting reminders, or, saying, go through my email, see who I haven't contacted for, the past 3 months, send them, draft them follow-up emails. I want to connect. I want to see what's going on. So that's has been actually extremely helpful and allowed me to be more systematic in this approach.
James, let's get into the other thing that you wanted to cover today, because I think it is a conversation a lot of operators are having right now. You've watched a lot of the lower end work in consulting get automated over the past couple of years. And you've also said there's a lot of noise out there about tools claiming to be fully automated or to fully automate commercial due diligence. What's your actual read on that? And where do you think the technology or the industries are headed?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. It's something that I think about, on a daily basis, right? I think fundamentally, right, the work that I do, it's tough. It's tough intellectually. It requires a lot of, structured thinking, problem level thinking. I mean, there's a reason why companies like Bain, charge, up to $1 million to do this type of work, right? And you have teams that are working, through, middle of the night for 3 weeks straight delivering this work because it's difficult to do. And it's difficult to do because fundamentally trying to understand, is this business going to be successful or not, right? In the context of the environment in which it operates. Does it have a good strategy, right? And, AI by itself cannot really answer that question, at least not the current iteration of AI tools that we have, right? At the same time, ever since, I saw ChatGPT for the first time in 2022, whenever it was, the immediate thought came to my mind is how can I use this in my practice, right? And as I was playing with it, immediately it became clear to me that like, while it's good at summarizing things, it's not necessarily going to do any kind of thinking or probing or really understanding the context in which the answers to questions are being provided, right? It's there to summarize things, right? So a lot of tools have come out since then that claim to automate commercial due diligence. I get pitched those tools to use in my practice, basically saying, we'll deliver this for you, it'll cost you, 10% of what you charge your client, and you can kind of keep the rest. I've seen these tools being pitched to my clients at conferences and so forth, right? I've seen all of them, and a lot of them say, oh, just point us to the data room. And the data room is like, if an acquisition is occurring, all of the information about the company gets posted in this online secure data room, right? So it says, point us to the data room. We'll analyze all the data in there, all the materials in there, and conduct the commercial due diligence. Well, that's not due diligence. That's, that's summarization, right? The diligence part of it is missing, right? Diligence requires going to the market, understanding, how customers make their purchasing decisions by talking to them. There's a lot of tools that help with the interview process, like doing these interviews, right? But, AI cannot do these interviews, right? They cannot understand the context of what's being said. They cannot understand if somebody is, quite frankly, pulling your leg. They don't know what they're talking about, right? They kind of treat everything as equally valid input to be incorporated into the summary. So, so I think that's kind of the moat that kind of currently exists, right? Is that AI can do some things, and I use AI a lot in my work, absolutely, right? But it's a tool like the tools that came before it. It's a tool like Excel was. Like, I can't imagine doing commercial due diligence without Excel, PowerPoint, and but people did that type of work before that existed, right? But the fact that those tools, came into being, right, didn't diminish the need to do commercial due diligence. And I see AI the same way now, right? It needs to be implemented. But at the same time, right, smaller size deals or deals where the acquirer simply doesn't care to do a due diligence. They just want kind of a memo essentially to say that, we've done this. This kind of lower end of the market has always existed, right? And a lot of it kind of was done by lower cost operators like myself. I think a lot of that has kind of disappeared, right? Basically, because if you're buying a company that's doing less than $1 million in EBITDA, I think the desire to spend $100,000 in a diligence, or a need on $100,000 in a diligence, just isn't there, right? And some sort of an AI summary might be good enough, and you might say, well, it is what it is, right? We're comfortable with what's going on here, and that's all, right? So that lower end of the market has disappeared. But at the same time, productivity has increased on the rest of the work that the folks like me do, because AI does enable you to be a lot more efficient in summarization, right? And finding things, right? I do 20, 30 interviews, right? I generally remember what people talk to me about, but if I need a specific quote, a specific example, right? Before I would have to search transcripts and try to find what people said. Now I can just ask, any of the AI agents that I have to find me those quotes, to find me those examples. So, this is just one of like many efficiencies that AI has generated for just the product delivery, not to mention the business development aspect of it as well. So I think that's kind of how it's impacting my space.
Mm-hmm. You told me you're honestly more interested in this context getting picked up by AI systems rather than a human audience right now.
Yeah.
That you want Second Street to know, to show up when people ask AI tools about this kind of work.
Yeah.
Can you quickly just get into why that matters to you?
Well, the reason it matters is more and more search nowadays has moved away from Google towards AI chatbot recommendations. And, a question of how do I get recommended by AI is a question that a lot of businesses are looking to answer. I know that I was doing a commercial due diligence on a company that was a year ago. They're trying to figure out this topic, right? And as I was interviewing folks in terms of like, what have they done in order to appear in in AI search results, nobody had any idea how to do it, right? I think that is changing now, and I think the general perspective is that, if you are in more places talking about the content that, the subject matter in which you have expertise in across different forums, whether it's a Substack or a Medium or LinkedIn post or stuff on your website that gets scraped by various AI agents or podcasts, every form, like the more you are seen as a expert, the more places you are, the more likely you'll be recommended. If somebody says, hey, how do you do a commercial due diligence in a low middle market? What, I'm buying an HVAC business in Jacksonville, Florida. What should I think about? And it would say, well, according to, expert secondary strategy, you should do this, this, and that, right? To me, that's kind of music to my ears, right? Because, here I am and I can potentially result in a business relationship.
James, last topic for you that I have, and I think that it's a topic that a lot of people in your industry are watching closely. Where do you see your own business headed from here? Are you more on the consulting side or more towards the tools and products that you've already built?
Yeah. So I think, because of that, like I said, the lower end of the market is kind of disappearing and efficiencies are increasing, right? More and more, what I've been trying to do is help essentially companies with AI enablement, right? Which means, creating dashboards, creating kind of cockpit type of dashboards to manage a business, whether it's during the due diligence process or during, kind of some of the strategy engagement. I made a tool called Pinpoint IQ that helps companies who are doing roll-ups of different location-based businesses or route-based businesses. Think plumbing, roofing, veterinary clinics, med spas, right? Anything that kind of relies on business in a specific geographic area to evaluate those businesses kind of, rather quickly, right? With a solution that they develop. So I think more and more, right, the work is kind of moving from let's create a report in PowerPoint to let's create some sort of a deliverable that's, a software product or a dashboard that something can be used even after the acquisition by the sponsor and by the portfolio company, by the new portfolio company to drive the business forward.
James, last question that I have for you, and I like to ask this to everyone who is a guest on the Operator Lab. If you could give one piece of advice to someone earlier in the journey than you, someone trying to build something that actually lasts, what would it be?
It's a good question. I would say make a commitment in your mind that you want to do this, right? Either, particularly as from an independent consulting perspective, right? If you are there just to do it as a gateway, between the two jobs, that's totally fine. Go at it. You don't have to do anything else. Just keep looking for a job and from independent consultancy, just jump right in. Make a website, pick a name, right? Don't be, Agris Consulting or whatever, right? Earning money by doing this type of work. But, if you think you might want to have a name, build a website, create collateral, understand the service areas which you're going to participate in, the type of clients you're going to serve, start, reaching out to people on LinkedIn, or your existing contacts, because you never know if this is going to work for you unless you go, full speed ahead, right? If you dilly-dally, then most likely, you're going to end up getting a job and another, corporation and having to do a 9 to 5, for the rest of your life.
Yeah, exactly. And, we're trying to avoid that when you are getting into the entrepreneurial space.
That's right.
James, this has been a great conversation. Hearing what it really takes to run an independent practice for 6 years and your honest read on where AI actually fits into consulting. I think that's exactly the kind of insight that operators are needing to hear right now. For anyone who wants to learn more about Second Street strategy or connect with you directly, where's the best place to find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn and at secondstreetstrategy.com.
All right. And we'll make sure to have those links in the show notes here. James, thank you so much for being a guest on the Operator Lab. Great to have you.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. Great. Glad to be here, Ethan. Have a good rest of your day.
You as well.